Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, May 23rd, 2024. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. This week, Mad Fermentationist and co-founder of Sapwood Cellars, Michael Tonsmeire, shares some delicious hoppy sours with Steve Wilkes and me. Mike shares his thoughts on how to combine hops and barrels to create well-blended creations that make you want to take sip after sip. And we did. If you want to support us financially, check out patreon.com/basicbrewing. And many thanks to everybody who's helping out in that way. If you go to patreon.com/basicbrewing, you can see a long list of stuff that you can access if you sign up as a supporter. And many thanks to the new Patreon subscribers who are signing up every week. Your help is very much appreciated. Financial supporters this week will see an early release of the video that we shot about Steve Wilkes' simple springtime Kolsch. Chris Colby and I formulated the recipe for that beer on this show, and Steve actually stuck to the recipe and didn't get all fancy with it. And it turned out very, very well. I'm sure it would have turned out very well, as well, if Steve had, gone to the pantry and spiced it up or whatever. Anyway, financial supporters will get the recipe for that beer, too. And they'll also get a special bonus episode that Steve and I shot several weeks ago where we made Black Velvets, which is a cocktail, from Steve's Oat Stout and Sparkling Wine. We don't usually get into cocktails, but that stout was the perfect candidate for that concoction. So move over mimosas. You could start a Sunday brunch with a Black Velvet made with a stout. I got some feedback after this past week's conversation with Scott LaFontaine at the University of Arkansas after our chat about their wide-ranging experimentation on malting different rice varieties. Listener Morgan from Elizabethtown, Kentucky says Miller Malting Company in Iowa is apparently malting rice. And Burling Home Brewing on Instagram says our friends at Sugar Creek Malting have malted rice, including, they say, crystal rice, black rice, and maybe chocolate rice. Although I didn't find those on the Sugar Creek website, so maybe that was just a limited release. But very interested to play with some malted rice stuff when I can get my hands on some. I do have my hands on some A37 Pog from our friends and sponsors at Imperial Yeast. Pog is Ebegarden Kvike, and time is running short to get your hands on some. I have 2 packages in the fridge that I want to use on something fermented warm outside on the porch, where I can try to maximize the tropical fruit flavors. Imperial Yeast has a recommended shelf life across their range of products of up to 4 months. So I'm not in a big hurry. Those 200 billion cells in each easy-to-open package will be biding their time, literally chilling out. Plus, I hear that you can underpitch Kvike and be perfectly fine. But anyway, the hoppy raw ale that I brewed with Pog is still delicious, still got some. By the way, Steve and I will have an experiment next week here on this show with that beer, which was a lot of fun to do. Ask your local homebrew store about A37 Pog and all the dependable deliciousness from Imperial Yeast, and check them out, as always, at imperialyeast.com. That's imperialyeast.com. Now, let's talk to Mike Tonsmeire on barrel-aged hoppy sours. Mike Tonsmeire, welcome back to Basic Brewing Radio.
Thanks for having me as always, James.
And Steve Wilkes is here beside me in the breakfast nook.
Always ready to participate.
I'm very excited. You've been generous enough to send us 3, I'm sure, what will be lovely beers. And we're going to talk about hoppy sours. You wrote a couple of posts on themadfermentationist.com about your process of brewing hoppy sours. And I guess, first of all, how are things going there at Sapwood Cellars?
Really nice. I'm sitting in our sort of little private event room right now. The tasting room's open. It was a pretty unproductive day. Our friends from Jailbreak Brewing in Laurel were over to brew a triple IPA with us. And yesterday we got an email saying that the CEO of Yakima Chief Hops and a couple of hop growers are in the area and want to swing by and have a beer and buy us lunch. And so Scott and I have been most of the day being more host than brewer, but such is the life.
It sucks to be you, Mike. You mentioned Scott Janish, your business partner and a co-founder of the brewery.
Yeah, he was hoping to join us, but had to get our beer trailer that he built to a festival that we're pouring at this weekend, and he's the one who owns the pickup truck, so that's one of his responsibilities.
Along with moving friends occasionally, and
yeah, well, he also builds the tables and hauls all the pack techs that people turn into the recycling center. And the truck has been very valuable. I'm glad he bought it.
So I was looking at I've got your copy of American Sour Beers here.
Uh-oh.
American Sour Beers: Innovative Techniques for Mixed Fermentations. And I was like, it's been a couple of years since that's been out. It's been a decade since that book.
Just hit 10 years. Yeah. Crazy.
Is there anything in there that's I bet you kind of feel the way we feel about our original Introduction to Extract DVD. We watched it together a few months ago, and everything. If you follow our instructions in that DVD, you can make good beer. Mm-hmm. But I wouldn't necessarily recommend those techniques nowadays. Is that kind of the way you feel about your book?
I'd say I'm somewhere in between on the book. Honestly, the book more was me as a home brewer. And now in the last 10 years, I interviewed lots of fantastic brewers, Peter Bouckaert from New Belgium and Vane from Russian River and Tommy from Lost Abbey. And they were more than generous with their time and their knowledge. I didn't even know the right questions to ask back then in terms of, well, not just how do I make a good beer, but how do I maintain a barrel program and prevent those beers from getting even more sour as time goes on and you refill the same barrels. The physics of how you deal with that much fruit and separating fruit from beer. How do you package these beers? How do you sell these beers? How do you all those sort of things that as a home brewer you don't have to worry about quite as much as when your volume and the physics of things change when you become a professional brewer.
Right. So you're probably too busy to write another book.
Honestly, it's getting better now. We now have 3 full-time brewers who work for us, Ken, Matt, and Joe, and they do a fantastic job and really allow us to have days like this where we brewed a collab, cleaned a bunch of tanks, organized things, all those things. And Scott and I did very little of the actual physical work of it. The trick that Scott and I run into now is that has allowed us to do many more beers. And so I still do all the social media and take all the photos and write most of the labels. And last year we put out, I think, 220 new beers, which is just absolutely ridiculous.
What?
Yeah.
Jeez.
Every Thursday we take something and we infuse it or double dry hop it, or we'll split something off to try a new yeast strain. And a lot of those are just draft only kegs, but our big thing is hustle, and when you put out new beers, that's something that drives people to the tasting room, and it's we learn and we think the beers get better by trying new things, and a lot of those ways that you make great beer is by figuring out all the ways to not brew good beer. Hey, this hop sounds really promising, and then you get some of it, you dry hop a keg of IPA and say, yeah, those the hop smelled great, but it just didn't translate.
Yeah.
Let's get rid of that one, make sure we've got good notes on it. Hey, we weren't excited about this vanilla bean double IPA, but the keg ran out in 3 hours and people are calling, asking if they can get more of it. Hey, let's think about making a bigger batch of that. And those are the sorts of things as you become a professional brewer, you have to decide, how much am I going to trust my palate and how much am I going to cater to the drinking public? And I think there has to be a balance there, but that's something we've played around with.
Yeah, you got to keep the customer satisfied as Simon and Garfunkel said.
And at a certain point, it says, hey, I may not be excited for this beer, but it keeps the lights on, the bills paid, so that I can do the things that I'm excited about, and that I know a smaller subset of customers are going to be going out of their way for. And sadly, at the moment, that's what the barrel aged mixed fermentation sour beers are. That market share is definitely dropping, but the people who like it still really like it.
Yeah, what is your product mix? What does it look like?
Honestly, the tap list at any one time is not as IPA heavy as some people might imagine, but that's because we're selling so much of those beers so quickly that in 3 weeks that an IPA and a double IPA are on draft, we might go through 5 or 6 kegs and 60 or 70 cases of each, and then new ones on. Whereas I love brown ales and I love sours. Those tend to move a little bit slower. It's always good to have those on, and the people, you want to have a variety of things. We try to be very a place that people don't veto. If a group wants to come here and somebody wants a Pilsner and somebody wants a cider and somebody wants a seltzer and somebody wants a pastry stout and somebody wants a local wine barrel aged sour cherry beer, I think we're one of the only breweries in the area, probably only breweries in the country, where you can sort of get a little bit of everything to that sort of extent.
Wow. Well, now, we're talking about your beer, but we should be sampling your beer.
Yes, absolutely.
We should.
Yeah. What is the first beer that we're going to be sampling?
So Barrels of Rings is a really unique beer. It starts as the word for our pale ale, Rings of Light. And I think the recipe for that is on my website. It's an all Citra pale ale, and it's one of those things that honestly I was not. This was not an idea I was excited about. I had some sour IPAs from very well-regarded breweries that I like almost everything they do, that had sort of just tasted like old IPAs to me, and so. My traditional approach to making a hoppy sour, and it's probably what I have in the book, would be to make a normal sour beer with 5 IBUs or 10 IBUs, age it for the whole time, and then right before packaging, dry hop. And we do that with this too. This is wort that's already gone through primary fermentation. In this case, we use Cosmic Punch. It goes into barrels that still have a resident culture in them. We don't even rinse those barrels. Because this has 2 pounds per barrel in the Whirlpool, which I believe works is like 4 ounces in a 5-gallon batch, something like that. So reasonably strong hop Whirlpool edition. But we want to protect those hop aromatics as much as we can. So it goes into the barrels with that house culture. We age it for, I think, 8 or 9 months, dry hop it with Citra Cryo, and then bottle it. But that was now almost a year ago. So this has been the bottle since August 5th, my bottle's 6/27, so June 27th, 2023.
Wow.
But still, it's really bright.
Yeah.
It's very bright.
Yeah. It's very effervescent. It's very light in color. It's very, very pale yellow. It's got a nice sort of rocky head that sticks around. It is, I'd say it's tart, but it's not, like intimidatingly sour. It's very drinkable and enjoyable, and it is a hoppy sour beer. I mean, why were you skeptical when you first thought about this?
When you add hops to the kettle, those hops then are just, a year old by the time the beer is in the bottle. And so versus, just adding a little bit of hops at the beginning of the boil to sort of inhibit lactobacillus, or aged hops certainly can have some aromatic compounds, or maybe have compounds that Brettanomyces can interact with. And just so much, you're just aging these beers warm. The beer is sitting in a barrel, barrels are porous, lets oxygen in at some level. Brettanomyces can scavenge oxygen, can help protect the beer. But I just had, beer from really good breweries that just didn't have that freshness. And this, I don't know if it's identifiably hoppy. It's identifiably citrusy. I definitely get some grapefruit, something like that.
Right.
And it doesn't smell like a fresh IPA, but it also doesn't smell like an IPA that's been sitting warm on a shelf for 2 years.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's very, very fresh. And it's not, and when I say hoppy, I'm referring more to the, sort of fruitiness and not, there's not a big bitterness load. It's not a very bitter beer on my palate, at least.
No, so it was all Whirlpool edition. I never know how accurate our IBU calculations are. I think, the brewing software said it was probably 40 IBUs, but that's 2 years ago, and so that's certainly fallen off by now. But those hops really, as you said, the pH is only 3.65. It's not very acidic. It's more tart, bright. And the hops really help to prevent the house souring culture from making the beer difficult to drink, really acidic. And that's something we've been trying to pull back on as people sort of, these should be beers that you can drink a whole one of, and not something that you're trying to, you have to share 5 or 6 ways to, choke it down and then throw, have some antacid and whatever. Beer needs to be delicious. Beer needs to be something that people like to drink. I mean, beer's not good for you in that way. If someone doesn't enjoy drinking a beer, they're going to drink something else.
Yeah, and this would be a good, it's a cliche, but this would be a good beer to go with food, and especially something that maybe is more heavy, because this, I would imagine, Steve, that this would scrub your palate, both in the effervescence and in the, just in the character of the beer.
Oh, yeah. This would be really good with, I think with, it'd be good with German food, like, kind of unctuous food. Is unctuous the right word?
Yeah.
I always use that word wrongly. But it's so kind of greasy and,
Right.
heavy. Or I think it'd be good with like spicy food, like Thai food or something like that.
For sure.
It'd be good.
So that's what I was thinking too, exactly like, Indian or Mexican or something like that, where you've got some richness and some spice that you really need to lift off. And again, almost those tropical flavors, I think, could complement some of those.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, as soon as you said tropical and Mexican, I immediately went to margaritas.
Oh, yeah. Well,
I mean, there is a little bit of that soury, lemon limey freshness about that beer. It is somewhat reminiscent of a good margarita.
Yeah, and in pineapple, something like a pineapple type character.
But this is the Al Pastor.
Yeah. And for me, this one almost it reads more saison than sort of traditional sour ale.
Yeah,
it's a more complex, more. I get a little bit of a peppery, something in there, and honestly, it's more interesting aromatically than most of our sour beers. We don't, despite having a lot of Brettanomyces in the brewery, it's not as expressive as I feel like my beers were at home. I don't know if that's the between barrel aging and aging in carboys, but once I've started doing these more aggressively hop beers, the Brettanomyces itself seems to be more expressive.
Well, I remember, was it you who sent beers that had Brett as the primary yeast? Did you send us?
I certainly, I think we did like an alternative fermentations kind of thing, and that was probably that one.
Yeah, but I mean, we were kind of afraid, that it was just going to be, extremely, cliche terms, horse blankety and all that. Yeah. But we were getting, it seems like we were getting more like pineapple-y kind of things out of those beers that where Brett was used as the primary yeast.
Definitely. No, and that's exactly it. We've been trying to figure out, particularly beers like this, where most of the batch is clean fermentation. We don't have a good way to split this out before that. And so how do we get more expression without having bread in there until after the primary fermentation is complete? And more hops in the Whirlpool really seems to have helped us with that.
Got some listener questions. Haven Schultz from the Brew Club says, have you found that certain hop varieties clash with the flavors produced by mixed fermentation? I would think sticking with something like Citra and Mosaic would be a safe bet, but I'm curious if any of the new exciting varieties in the market have clashed into some unintended or harsh characters in a sour hoppy beer.
We haven't done, we've done Citra, we've done Mosaic, we've done Nelson. I'm sure we've done a handful of others, but we did a sour red with Simcoe and Amarillo and Cascade. I'd say that in general, doing hops in a sour beer, the hops become a little bit more generic. You don't necessarily get the as much of a varietal character. I think that's just partly because once you dry hop it, we still have, say, 4 weeks or 6 weeks of bottle conditioning. You're just not getting it at that. The varietal maybe comes from the very volatile aromatics. They're then being worked on by Brettanomyces or just aging out after 4 weeks or whatever. Scott often describes it as sort of a Pez-like, candy, sweet, tropical, but not, you're sort of losing the dankness and losing those sorts of things.
Yeah, I was going to say the hop varieties that offer a lot of that kind of big, dank, grassiness would be hops that I would not go to initially. In other words, I just remember when I had the shop, I'd get some hops in, like experimental hop 7193.
Yeah.
And you'd try it and be like, whoa, that's pretty dank. So that dank flavor doesn't seem like it would pair well with the sour, I guess is where I'm headed. Ultimately.
It certainly wouldn't be as natural a combination. So we did a beer called Measure Twice that was Nelson and Rawaka, which are relatively more of that sort of like diesel-y dank New Zealand thing. I really like them, but it was that dankness just didn't translate. We were left with more of the grapefruit, the white wine, the sort of the thiolized character behind those hops. I would say they were also a little bit more distinct than some of the other hops that, again, tend to just sort of be a little bit more sweet candy-like.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there's a huge variety of the new hops coming out that are, more tropical, more fruit forward, more citrusy, that could be really fun combinations with sourness, just because you think of fruit as being, fruit is naturally acidic. And so pairing those flavors with sourness really is more synergistic, I guess, in that way.
As this beer warms, I am getting more of the Brett character. It's more of an Orvalli kind of a Brett character, which is nice.
And these beers seem to really, as they age, change more. We did a beer a couple of years ago, again, that sort of more traditional, like low hopped, but then dry hopped with Mosaic in gin barrels. I hadn't had one for a couple of years, and we had a vintage sour tasting when we opened it. And someone just said, it just smells like guava. And it really did. It just had this big tropical guava thing that I wouldn't expect from Mosaic hops. I wouldn't expect from gin barrels. But that it was this, and that's really what I love about sour beers is that you can get these flavors that are unique and surprising and unexpected. I love a coconut vanilla bourbon barrel stout, but you never have a coconut bourbon vanilla stout and go, wow, this really tastes like blueberries or something like that. Whereas with sour beers, because it's a living thing, and hops have all these compounds that yeast can interact with, glycosides and terpenes and all these things, that you really can get new and exciting, unexpected changes.
Yeah, listener Niles from, is it Stowe or Stowe, Massachusetts?
Stowe.
Stowe, okay. I think I knew that, but I forgot.
It's just down the road from Stowaway.
It's away from Stowe. Niles, who's been a listener for a long time, says, how much aroma or flavor of what you expect out of certain hop varieties like Citra and Citrus or Cascade and Grapefruit are you getting in these sour beers? And have there been any surprises and flavor differences going into a lower pH beer? Like, does it unlock a different part of the flavor wheel? And it sounds like maybe it does.
I'd say less the pH thing and more just the interaction with Brettanomyces and time. But really all that only works if you are as careful as possible about oxygen pickup. So again, we're putting these beers into as big a culture as we can that's really going to protect those. And then when we package them, before the show opened, we were all talking about packaging beer and adding sugar. These beers we partially carbonate up to about 2 volumes of CO2, and then we add rehydrated wine yeast that we add Go Firm or Startup, like a rehydration nutrient, and a little bit of sugar. And again, we're purging the bottles with CO2. We're doing as best as we can to keep oxygen out of there, but then we're not just relying on Brettanomyces to eat sugar over for 4 weeks or 6 months or whatever, we're adding wine yeast that we hope is eating that sugar within 24 hours. It might not be done in 24 hours, but hopefully it's eating the sugar, scavenging the oxygen, protecting all those compounds, and then allowing Brettanomyces to work slowly over a longer time. I'd say also a big thing is not storing the beer too cold. Normally, when you'd be aging a hoppy beer, the colder the better is going to preserve it. But if you put these beers in a fridge for 6 months, the Brettanomyces is going to sleep. It's not going to keep working. And so you don't want to age them at 80 or 90 degrees, but even I'd rather 75 than 35. But yeah, to answer the question, I think early on you sort of get those expected flavors, but then as the beer ages, it will sort of transform in, to me, usually positive ways, but you lose that sort of varietal character.
I don't know if you planted it in my head or not, but I'm getting a little bit of Pez candy, the very last dreg that I took out of my little sample glass. This is, we're pouring beer number 2 now.
Excellent. Ooh, I was just finishing off my glass. I don't have anyone to split my beers with. So this is a growth ring. So this is a beer we do every other year. And it is, I'd say, loosely inspired by lambic or goose. We have sort of a complex barrel cellar. We have a lot of different base beers. We have a lot of different microbes. We don't just have like a single house culture. Each barrel started with a different bottle drag or commercial culture or a wild capture or something. And then over the last 6 years, whenever we brew a new batch, we go taste barrels. If there's something that we really think would suit the new beer, we bring the barrel over, we pump some of that culture into the fermenter, we refill the barrel. And so I honestly don't really know what microbes are from where anymore. They're all just sort of mixed together in a big royal rumble. So this is a blend of 4 oak barrels that we did about a year ago. One of those barrels is the same base beer as barrels of rice. So 25% of it is that hoppier base. And the rest of it is, I would say, more traditional sour. So, something that was turbid mashed with aged hops in the lambic tradition, something that was maybe more in like a Flanders pale kind of tradition. We have a golden sour base that has some oats in it that's a little sweeter, a little richer. But essentially, we just taste all these barrels. This is the blend that me and Scott and the brewers, our bar manager Spencer, sort of all thought was really good. And then we blended it together. This one doesn't get re-yeasted. So this one is 100% that house culture in the bottle conditioning. Yeah. So it's a little bit more sour, but no dry hopping. So it's really just the expression of the barrels and the microbes and time and all those things.
It looks like the first beer. So just copy and paste those, the appearance notes from the first.
I'd only say I think the first one maybe was a little hazy, and this one, at least my pour, is quite clear. And that may just be that mine have been sitting undisturbed for the last 3 years or whatever.
But it is still bright, but there is a complexity there that it's a wider range of flavors than the first one.
Definitely.
There's some darker notes, but they're very, very subtle. I mean, y'all did a good job of blending. This is very, very well blended. Because
to me, it's all what people like sandalwood or something like that. That sort of like deeper, richer, spicy wood kind of.
Yeah, neither one of these beers. The first one, I don't know if you would. I don't know if I could have told you that it was barrel aged. Maybe just because of the way my palate has been trained over the years. Of if you drink a beer and it tastes like a table leg, oh, that's got some oak in it. These are much more sophisticated. Yeah, and I do get some wood character in this beer, but it's very delicate. I mean, it's not like chewing on a table leg. It's got I get I don't know wood varieties, but but it is a lighter wood character that is. It just adds to the balance. Everything is just there's so many notes happening at once.
it was one of the big issues we had early on that when we opened, every barrel we had was a new barrel. And not brand new, but, we got it from a local winery or we got it from a barrel broker. And our beers were too oaky. A lot of them smelled like walking down the lumber aisle at Home Depot.
Does it just take... I was going to ask, does it just take time to kind of use the barrel until it loses some potency?
Exactly. Or your other option is to fill the barrel with, say, 180-degree water and let it soak for 24 hours, dump it out, maybe refill it again.
Yeah.
And we did that a couple of times. And the problem there is that you're sucking out, if it was a Sauvignon Blanc barrel, you're removing any of the sort of interesting notes.
Yeah.
And so luckily we're at a stage now where some of our barrels have been at 5, 6, 7, 8 fills. And hey, this last batch out of it was okay. The microbes weren't great. Maybe it started tasting a little oxidized or old or something. Retire that barrel, bring in a new gin barrel or a Madeira barrel or a port barrel or something fun. And then maybe you do a blend with the brand new port barrel for flavor, but then also the same base in a third or a fourth use barrel. So you don't have too much oak, but you still have that varietal character. And that's sort of the juggling of a barrel program that we're still trying to sort of figure out what's the right ratio. How often do you retire barrels? How often do you want new barrels? The beers tend to be, once it goes into a bottle, the oak character sort of mellows with time. So maybe you want to be a little too oaky when it goes into the bottle, and then it sort of mellows out to a more smooth level over 6 months or a year. But how long do you want to hang on to the bottle before you sell it? Do you want to sell it when it's too oaky? Do you want to hold on to it until it mellows out? As a home brewer, it was great just being able to, oh, this beer tastes pretty good now. I'll drink more of it. Oh, it's not ready yet. I'll just, sit on it.
Yeah.
Here, there's a little bit more calculus on we don't want to hold on to beer longer than we need to. Some of our beer sits in barrels for 3 years, but that's, to an end.
Yeah, it's almost not fair. You've got...
Yeah,
you've got so many barrels that you can choose from now, and the second part of your article is about the blending process, and you've got some tips on setting yourself up for success. And it's
anytime a home brewer says, "Should I get a 60-gallon barrel?" I generally say no. That you'd be much better off with 12 carboys. With some have oak, some don't. Different microbes, different base beers. It's the same reason that I don't have. People always ask me why don't I have a foeder? And because if I just had one giant foeder, it would be very hard to blend it.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
because you only have one of them. If you had 8 foeders or something like that, that would make a lot of sense. I'd much rather have a bunch of barrels that I could pick and choose from and age some longer and whatever with different microbes, rather than just one giant thing that essentially I would just have to draw beer off of and deal with as is.
Going back a bit, you talked about a turbid mash. David from Facebook says, I want to start brewing lambics, but the whole process of turbid mashing sounds really intimidating. Although I brewed over 115 batches already, is the mash really that important, or is it rather the microorganisms? I plan to use a sour Solera from Bootleg Biology. So, I mean, maybe you should, for those of, Steve and I, of course, know what a turbid mash is. But, for those who don't know, start there.
Yes, remind me.
So we had a really fantastic experience a couple of weeks ago. We're friendly with the guys from Penn Druid Brewing, which is down in Spurville, Virginia. And they are one of these places that is just whole hog committed to wild beer. They have a wood-fired kettle. They do turbid mashes. They are basically all either cool ship spontaneous fermentation, or they have like a house culture that was wild that's been propagated or whatever. And we got to do the whole brew day with Jennings, the head brewer, and Van, his brother was there, and there's a third brother who's involved. Super cool place. We have done a handful of turbid mashes here. We're still trying to figure it out. We've yet to sort of really perfectly dial it in. The turbid mash is the last thing I would think about. It's sort of the lowest rung on the importance versus having good microbes, having the right hopping rate, using making an unfermentable wort. So honestly, just mashing it 159, 160, 161 will get you a lot of the way to what a turbid mash does, but maybe not 100% of the way there. Just a turbid mash is going to pull out starches that you're probably not going to get out with the sort of just a hot saccharification rest. But basically, a turbid mash is a modified decoction. And the way Pendrew did, I really liked. So essentially, just a couple of stages in the mash, you draw off some of the wort, heat it up so you're as quickly as possible denaturing the enzyme. So you've got sort of starchy water off to the side. And then at some point, you add all of that back to reach mash up. And so you're pulling off, heating it, and then keeping it off to the side. Once your saccharification is done, adding it all back to get to mash out. And getting those ratios right is very difficult. The way Pendrew did that I really liked, a lot of the recipes call for bringing it up into the 150s and then adding back the hot wort to get to mash out. What Jennings did was he just did like a beta rest, so at low 140s. Then he essentially drew off the entirety of the mash into the kettle. So he's got all of the wort, brings it up to a boil, and puts all of that back into the main mash to reach mash out. And so essentially you've drawn off most of the enzymes are in the liquid, you've denatured all the enzymes in the kettle, and now you're pushing it back into the mash tun, raising the whole thing up to 171, 172 degrees, and then running off and sparging with hot water, really hot water generally, above 190, just to pull in more starches. And so it's something we've done 4 or 5 times here. Those beers are not necessarily the best sour beers we make. We're still trying to figure out, what works for us, how to get the fermentability right. You're using truly raw wheat, so not even flaked wheat or torrefied wheat, but just like the cracked raw wheat, which doesn't have great doesn't have great extraction, and it's really hard on your mill, and we're figuring it out. But I would say if you're getting into sour beers, I wouldn't worry about a turbid mash until you're well on your way and know your microbes and figure out what else you like about it.
Essentially, it's just giving food for the microbes in the long-term fermentation, right?
Exactly. There's some, like Pediococcus particularly, can eat starch. And so you're extracting starches, dextrins. But again, you can get a lot of the same things either by just mashing really hot, or you could even consider adding some flour to the boil or some cornstarch or something like that. But honestly, I generally don't think that that's necessary. The big thing that I noticed on on growth rings that we're drinking right now, next to Driefonteinen or a Cantillon or a real Belgian Lambic, is that they have more body. I think the turbid mash is pulling in, I don't know if it's proteins or beta glucans or what, but they have they're substantial for being 5% beers that are, and apparently a lot of them aren't as dry as you'd expect them to be. The microbes are eating them, but they still might be at 1010 or 1014 or something like that. So they still have some things that are like really truly unfermentable, rather than maybe just mashing at 160 where you're making dextrins that are unfermentable to brewer's yeast, but that doesn't mean they're unfermentable to Brettanomyces or Pediococcus that can make alpha glucosidase or these other enzymes that break down those carbohydrates into fermentable sugars. So I think that's what I've come to realize is that what I think my lambic-inspired beers are missing it. I'm hopeful that that's getting more turbid mash and figuring out our ratios and whatever will allow us to have beers that have a richness to them, a fullness to them, along with the funk and the acid and all the other wood character and everything else.
Now we're talking about adding hops in the barrel or in the secondary fermentation. Then that raises the topic of hop creep. I mean, does adding hops into the barrel add enzymes that then denature or break down some of those starches that you want for the bugs, or is that enter into the equation at all?
Yeah, it's definitely something that happens. Audrey and I, for our 10th wedding anniversary a year ago, went to Scotland, and we went to a Pocketful Ales outside of Glasgow. We got a tour from sole brewer, sole owner, sole employee Gareth Young, and his whole thing, I won't say his whole thing, many of his barrels have whole hops in them. And his sort of original inspiration was the original India Pale Ales. That's how those beers were made. And it's amazing. He's got these old brewing textbooks that essentially they don't call it hop creep, but that's what they're describing, is that hop creep is the thing that's working synergistically with the Brettanomyces to keep the fermentation going and help protect the beer. And something we've played around with, we did a beer called Violet You're Turning Violet, that we put about a pound of whole mosaic hops into each oak barrel. And it really, again, they were funkier, they were more interesting, they dried out more. And definitely like hop creep is a part of that. And just kind of like barrels of rings, it didn't taste dry hopped. It just tasted funkier, more interesting, more unique. It definitely had a berry note. And then we add a little bit of real frozen blueberry to give it some color and some pop and whatever. But I think it's a really fun concept. It's something that I helped brew at Mackenzie's outside of Philadelphia probably 15 years ago now. And they had a couple of barrels that they'd said, oh, yeah, well, we had dry hopped a beer in the barrel 3 batches ago. We just can't get the hop sock with the hops that were crammed into it back out. And so we just leave it in there. And for them, it was inoculating the barrel, that the yeast was stuck on that. And so that was carrying the microbes forward to the next batch or whatever. So it's definitely something you could consider. And none of those beers have been, grassy or any of the things you'd hear about for a beer that was on hops for too long. They really just had fun, funky, unique aromatics that you just don't get when you have, again, like 5 IBUs of Magnum at the start of the boil or something like that.
Interesting.
We've poured the third beer.
Okay, so get ready for acid.
Don't take the brown acid. No, wait, that's something else. So this is called Not Quite Ritual.
Correct. So this is a weird beer. We did a collab with Bissell Brothers up in Maine a couple of years ago. And so the base was, this was in sort of thiols were getting to be big. This base beer had Phantasm powder, the New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc powder. It had Cosmic Punch, the thiol producing strain from Omega. It had Hallertau Blanc hops in the whirlpool at sort of half the rate. So like 1 pound per barrel, again, like 2 ounces in a 5-gallon batch. And then this one was in wine barrels for, I think, pretty close to 2 years. Most of the batch became the Bissell Brothers collab. We did Field Learning, which went on to local Chardonnay grapes and had their house culture in it. This was just sort of the extra that didn't work in that blend. It went on to local apricots. So again, it's like a slightly hoppier base, but not a dry hop beer. And then those apricots really add a lot of acidity. So the beer was very low acid, and it's one of the things I've had to take some time to learn of how much more acidic our beers have gotten from fruit additions. We now have to make sure a beer is this beer was probably about as sour as barrels of rings before it went on to apricots.
Yeah, it's quite tart.
It's very tart.
it's like a sour candy.
Well, it really is.
It's delicious. And it's so good.
The fruit is just it's amazing. It's a fruit beer with all the complexity of sour and funky, and I mean you got all that going. I'll never drink an apricot Hefeweizen again. I mean, there's a huge adding that sour component.
Wow,
is just over the top.
And these were really terrific apricots from a local farm, Toygo Orchards. they come to my local farmer's market. I walk around, every couple of weeks, see who's got interesting fruit. If there's something that's really delicious, I say, hey, do you guys have extra? And this guy was like, sure, no problem. You're willing to pay, $4 a pound for 100 pounds of apricots, essentially just let me know when you want them and I'll come to the farmer's market. And I walked up there with a little red wagon and took 100 pounds of apricots home. And...
Now, can you get away with, since it's for use in brewing, can you get away with sometimes getting some fruit that's like too ugly for the farmer's market? You know what I'm saying? That's maybe blemished, or I'm not saying it's rotten.
No.
You mean like Aunt Esther food?
Seconds.
Yeah.
We have gotten seconds. I would say the problem we have, we got some seconds nectarines last year. And they were beautiful, except some of them were cracked. And the problem was, it was hard. Stone fruit nectarine, peaches in particular, I think really need to be ripe. If not, a little overripe. Mm-hmm. And the problem is with them being cracked is that it took all this monitoring, because some would go ripe and then some parts of them would start to mold. And so you'd have to get those, clean them, process them, freeze them. And then the next day, figure out which ones were ripe, overripe. Whereas if they'd been sort of less cracked or whatever, we probably could have let them all age and ripen a little bit more. And we ended up processing them when they were probably a little underripe overall, and the aroma just didn't pop as much as we wanted them to.
That might be a place where a home brewer maybe has an advantage only because you're working with a much less volume.
Right.
You can go buy a flat of strawberries or whatever,
exactly.
Apricots, and you got time to kind of pick through them and make sure that they're exactly right. Where if I were
that's exactly what I'd say. Yeah, 250 pounds of fruit is a lot of fruit.
That's very labor intensive to get the exact right flavor profile out of that fruit,
and particularly to save $100 or $200, which is at our scale. I mean,
and then spend $500 on labor,
but or just it's that time that there's only so much time we and the staff have, and so that might be me coming in on a Saturday to deal with it, rather than, hey, we could just all knock it out on Monday together kind of thing.
That's one of the most interesting discussions, or at least I always find it interesting, is that the difference between what a commercial brewer can do or is willing to do compared to what a home brewer can do and is willing to do. Mm-hmm. So in other words, it's really important, say, in a commercial brewery, to hit an efficiency just right, because that's dollars. If you're more efficient, you're not spending money, sending sugar down the drain. A home brewer is like, just add another pound of grain.
Yeah.
Who cares?
And I'd say, as a brewery that's focused on the tasting room, I get to be closer to a home brewer than most breweries do.
Nice. Yeah.
When we've had some great big craft brewers come through, and we'll say, we're using this new product. It's really inexpensive. It adds, maybe it's $5 per 30 gallons for a barrel, and it's just like, for us, that's like free. That's
right.
That's like 1 pint out of 30 gallons, and they'll just go like they're having a heart attack, like $5. Like, that's my entire. I wish my profit margin was $5 per barrel by the time I, pay for bottles and labor and the cut to the distributor, the cut to the the wholesaler, the cut to the retail store, and for me, when I run the math, it's just like, if I can sell pints of this, and that's the great thing about sour beers, is that people come here, they buy them, they store well, and I get a good price for them. But that's also, I think, where sour beers had trouble, is that a lot of bigger breweries tried to do sour beer as a distribution to stores, and they're beers that really need an explanation.
Right.
And
what's wrong with this?
Well, but even someone who likes sour beers, and there's just a wall of 100 of them, and they're all $20. Which one's really sour? Which one is more funky? Which one is, it says apricot, but it's just a little bit of apricot. Which one is straight apricot juice? An explanation, not just of what sour beer is, but why is this one special? Why should I buy this one instead of that one? And when people come to our tasting room, it's like, hey, the bartender helped to forage the staghorn sumac and the wine berries that went into this one. This is a barrel from the local winery that we've got a good relationship with. This one,
and you might be able to get a little teeny sample.
Well, and that's something we've been trying to figure out because we often just have one of them on tap and we have a lot of bottles available. And so something I've been trying to figure out is like we don't do flights, we just do half pours or half the price of a full pour. But for bottles, particularly we're adding food soon, I think we'll do some sort of like, when you go to a winery, you kind of get the structured tasting thing where it's like this week we have these 3 available for $10. You get a 4-ounce pour of this. We tell you a little bit about it. You drink it. You come back. Okay, here's last year's version of the same beer. Try it. Okay, here's a different beer with cherries in it. Try it, something that would allow people not to have to commit to a whole bottle for that exact reason that it's easy to try something on draft. Hey, can I have a little sip of that? Wow, that's great. Yeah, I'll take a glass of that versus here's the bottle. Do you want the whole thing or none of it?
I'm assuming that still, when you're brewing a beer that is intended to be, brewed with bugs, the IBU levels, on the brewing process in the beginning, do you still have to monitor that to make sure that it's not the IBUs aren't too high to inhibit the souring microorganisms, and then how do you use hopping as a kind of control lever in the barrel? And I'm structuring this question having read your article, and so I kind of but I'm just teeing you up to kind of talk about that whole process.
Sure. No, so like the first one we tried, Barrels of Rings, was probably about 40 IBUs. And so I wouldn't go much higher than that, both because of the microbes, but also because bitter and sour are conflicting flavors.
So that's 40 IBUs coming out of the kettle?
Approximately. So it's a whole bunch of Citra in the whirlpool. And not only IBUs, but just, hop compounds, which are very micro stabilizing, whatever, for lactobacillus. And again, that beer did not get very sour. That's again, 3.6 pH is more tart and tangy than sour, but still 3.6 is well below. It's 10 times more acidic than a IPA at 4.6.
Yeah, I've heard the number like maybe 15. If you're going to brew a sour beer, with souring organisms, you don't want to get, more than like 12 or maybe 15 IBUs, and you're doing 40.
Yeah, well, and honestly, I believe, I don't know how much he still has these on the website, but a lot of the Russian River sours, I think, were in the 20s. And so that was sort of one of my early indications that, maybe the 5 IBUs, 10 IBUs was overly low. The trick, too, that we've run into is that as our microbes have been repitched from barrel to barrel and sort of become endemic to our brewery, they've become more resistant to hops. And so early on, we did not have enough acidity, and we kept pulling levers, lowering hopping rates, adding more microbes, these things. And then at some point, the switch flipped, and we got too much sourness. And then at that point, you're steering a cruise ship. You've got 50 barrels filled. They're all going to be too sour. And sort of the first move was that what we had noticed was the beers often weren't getting that much more acidic than they had been originally until we went on to fruit. And that additional dose of simple sugars from the fruit, plus the acid from the fruit, plus at these high fruiting rates we do, and sometimes we're adding all of the fruit for the whole batch to only half the beer, just the way our tanks work out, you're then diluting the IBU. So if you're adding, making a fermentation that's 30% fruit and 65% beer or whatever, you're taking 1/3 of your IBUs out and adding simple sugars, and that yeast and the bacteria just go crazy. We started adding hop acids. So tetralone, hexalone, alpha acid extract. There are homebrew stores that sell this kind of thing. But the other move you can do is just a very light dry hop. There have been some studies done that dry hops, you don't need the isomerization to make hops antimicrobial. We were talking about adding hops to the original IPAs as a sour preventative kind of thing. You can just add a light dry hop if that's something you're interested in. but that will change the flavor. Whereas adding a hop extract really is pretty much flavor neutral. It'll help with the head retention on these beers, which could not always be great, but I think, as you noticed, a couple of ours have pretty good head retention, and a lot of that is actually those first two. I don't think had this. The apricot one would certainly have had hop extracts in there.
So they don't add bitterness.
So the alpha acid extract does not add bitterness. The tetralone and the hexalone do, but at sort of typical dosing rates, it's like 4 or 5 IBUs. So it's a relatively small amount, particularly if you started off with a lower IBU level. If you start off with 10 IBUs, again, once you're diluting with fruit, you're diluting those IBUs. So almost you're just replacing the IBUs that you're diluting out.
Steve, do you have a favorite?
Well, in terms of just from this sensory panel, my favorite is Growth Rings.
Was that the second one?
Second beer, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. It's kind of like the Goldilocks effect.
Yeah, it was a little bit of everything was just right.
Yeah. All three were delicious.
They're all good beers for sure.
That's my favorite too. Everyone knows apricots are delicious or cherries are delicious, but when you can get unique flavors just out of barrel and microbes and malt, I think that's where sour beer is really special.
Mm-hmm. It's very complex. The Growth Rings is very complex. Well, they all are, but the Growth Rings is very complex, and it has a savory character and a richness and a, dare I say it, umami.
Yeah.
It's just a little bit beefier. It's just a little bit more, and I really like it.
Yeah. So
Awesome.
so say we don't live in the Washington D.C. area, Mike Tonsmeire, near Sapwood Cellars. How would we get? Could we get these beers?
Well, sadly now the first shipment of the Sapwood Cellars Ball Shipping Club has closed. But we'll be doing this probably once every 6 months or so, where we send out 6 different bottles of our barrel-aged sour beers. I'm also, to everyone who signs up, sending an email with essentially my tasting notes, the recipe notes, what the microbes were, what the grain bill was, what the hopping rates were, what the process was, where we got the fruit from, all those sorts of fun, nerdy, homebrewer-centric kind of details. Because honestly, these are the sorts of beers that I want people doing at home. I want people making good versions of these. I want people excited and passionate about sour beers because that's what I'm excited and passionate about. And you can sign up. It's not cheap. It's like $146, including shipping. In Maryland, we can't send direct to consumer, and so we have to sell the beer to Tavor, which is an e-com platform in Washington. They take the beer and then they package it up and send it directly to, it's like 33 or 34 states at this point. There's a whole list. If you go to my blog, there'll be links to it, or I'm sure our website has it as well. But we sell a lot of these beers in-house and we have local clubs that are great if you're within striking distance of us, but can only make it a couple of times a year. We have clubs where you can pre-purchase beers and then just come pick them up for a much lower price. But if you are far and wide, it's pretty much the only way to get our beer. Pretty much none of it leaves the tasting room other than to direct shipping.
Well, these are as we would expect, very mature beers and
sophisticated.
Sophisticated, yeah. That's the word. I was going to say delicate, but that's not the word. Because the third one especially is not is not a delicate beer, but it's delicious, and you can tell, some, and they're more mature than the sour beers that we used to. I mean, Lawfully is a different animal. The Lawfully of old, was what turned us on to sour beers.
Absolutely.
And we've had some sour.
That was the first serious sour beer in the United States. Period.
Mm-hmm. And I haven't had. I guess they still make it. I haven't had it in forever, but it was really, really good. And I've had sour beers since then that were just like, wow, that's sour, and not much else,
Right.
There's a whole lot more going on than just the low pH in these beers that brings you back to sipping another sip. And that's what's important, is to make a beer that you want to keep on drinking. And it's, I wouldn't have expected anything else from you and Scott.
I really appreciate it. And honestly, for me, we're now selling the crap out of barrel aged imperial stouts, and bourbon has become such a big thing. But to be able to get this much complexity and uniqueness in a 5% beer that I don't have to feel bad about drinking a whole one of, where with the bourbon barrel stouts, it's like a whole 60-ounce bottle is like more than I should be drinking in a day, and 800 calories or something like that, which I don't need. And to have these beers that are dry and complex and drinkable, to me, it just sort of puts together everything that I think is special about beer. And that's, I'm hopeful that these beers keep selling well, because a lot of breweries that specialize in sour beer are going out of business, closing up shop, pivoting, and I'm hopeful that there is still the consumer appetite for these beers long term.
Same here.
So as a home brewer, guy with a bucket, somebody like me. Now, I mean, and you're wanting to start brewing sour beers, give me an elevator speech on how to start.
I think the easiest move is split batches. If you have a 10-gallon system, take 5 gallons. If you have a 5-gallon system, take 1 gallon.
Nice.
And I'm now going to expand. I used to say Kolsch, brown ale, wheat, wit, Hefeweizen, lower IBU,
as the
not
base
too
beer.
roasty, as the base beer.
Okay.
But now I'd say pale ale. I'd say Hoppy Pilsner. I'd say essentially anything, not double IPA, not imperial stout, but almost anything else.
Yeah.
And then just put it into that 1-gallon jug, add the normal yeast you were going to add, but then bottle dregs from a bottle conditioned sour beer you like, a yeast blend from White Labs or Y Yeast or Omega or Bootleg Biology or Yeast Bay or any of those other great places. And then just start build out a little library, see what works for you, see what works, what microbes you like, what base beers you like. It gives you blending options. It opens up the possibilities. And then, hey, if something really works out well, do a big batch of it.
Nice.
Well, Mike Tonsmeire, we've been talking for an hour, and it's gone by like...
It's the fastest hour of my life. I don't know where the time went.
I wish I had a nickel. I don't know. There was something... We've been together for a long time, you and us, Mike, and...
We're getting close. Are you at 20 years yet?
In July will be our 19th anniversary, and then we'll head into our 20th year.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Congratulations.
Well, thank you. And you were on in I think September 2006.
It was early.
So you're right
Early
there.
on,
You're
yeah.
right there with us. And you said some very nice. You retweeted or whatever you do on Facebook, reposted, shared my original post asking for questions, and you said some nice things. And I don't know that they're deserved, but but thank you.
It's true. I mean, my first internet beer appearance, other than a forum post, was on your show.
So we can take complete credit for your success, right?
That's right.
Pretty much.
No, I think you would have blown up and have been successful regardless of where you started, and we were just lucky enough to have snagged you for your first.
It really seemed the response to me doing experiments really made me think that there was an interest in what I was interested in, or if I just followed what I was interested in, other people would be interested in it. And that's sort of what's guided me the last 20 years was, if I think a beer tastes good, that's what's the most important thing, rather than trying to cater to some supposed beer drinker's palate. If people in the tasting room tell me something, I'll believe that. I'm not going to try to brew a beer to what my imagined idea of what people think
Well, Mike Tonsmeire, say hello to Scott Janish for us, and best of luck, and keep on doing what you're doing.
I appreciate it. I'll talk to you sooner than 4 years from now.
Please.
Sounds good.
Many thanks to Mike, to Steve, and to those who sent questions. Mike, at the end there, when he said 4 years, he was referring to the fact that we thought it had been 4 years since he had been on the show, but in fact, he was on the show to talk about recipe development and hops in April of 2022. So 2 years, which is still too long. If you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to james@basicbrewing.com, or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com, and please don't forget to tell us where you're from. Check out our mobile-friendly shop at basicbrewingshop.com. Thanks to everybody supporting us through our Patreon page. Special goodies coming your way. Check that out at patreon.com/basicbrewing. So until next time, until then, thanks for listening, everybody. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dodson. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. In the meantime, stay well and stay tuned. So long.